Welcome to Cultural Fluency Makers. I'm your host, David Wellish. Each week, we welcome leaders to share how they stay ahead of the ever-changing consumer landscape. With today's cultural transformation, top brands need to understand diverse consumer segments from Gen Z, Hispanic, and LGBTQ+ to gamers, wine enthusiasts, and basketball fanatics in Iowa. Their marketing strategies require them to keep the pulse on their consumers, but also their brand in the category to continue to grow revenue for the long term. Cultural Fluency Makers is sponsored by Collage Group, the only cultural intelligence engine that provides brand and consumer insights on the why that drives consumer behavior and purchase decisions. Let's get started. I am so excited for this episode. I have been looking forward to it for weeks, and I know we're going to have a dynamic and insightful dialogue. With me today is a magnetic force with a 20-year legacy of growing leading brands and rallying top-tier teams to unprecedented heights. She's a Latina and a visionary who thrives on pioneering new paths and delivering results based on out-of-the-box strategies. With a work ethic that prioritizes collaboration, creativity, and leveraging insights, she has worked at the best consumer companies in the planet and is now the Senior Vice President of Global Brand and Consumer Marketing at the NFL. Marissa Solis, congrats on your incredible professional trajectory and welcome to the show. Excited to learn from you today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, David, for having me.
All right, let's get started. Gosh, as you so well know, America is rapidly changing in its demographic and cultural landscape. Diversity is accelerating. And with that in mind, how does that change the way marketing ought to be working? What role does inclusive marketing play in your overall marketing strategy? What do you think has changed? Marissa, how do you see it evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it's the question of the century, right? And it's interesting that people are talking about the changing demographics now because the reality is that they've changed. I mean, our America looks very different today than it did, gosh, even 5 years ago. If you look at Gen Z or below, it's already majority minority, and it's not simple minority where you're looking at segments. It's all intersectional, right? We have ethnicities, multi generations. There's so many layers that really, as a marketer, you know, inclusion is everything. The thing as a marketer is you have to connect at a very personal level with your audience. You have to see who your audience is. You have to know who they are and engage with them in a very unique way. And you can't do it in generalities. You have to do it in a very personalized way, right? So knowing the diversity and being extremely inclusive to speak to every single individual in a way that connects with them personally is the challenge of a marketer today.
How important is it, you think, for consumer brands to get this right? And your experience, Marissa, is so great. You've managed core brands, you've managed a Hispanic P&L, among the only ones in the industry to have done that, and now you're in this sort of massive mass market, media brand. How important is this for brands to get right?
I mean, it's critically important. The demands of the consumer today are that they don't want advertising. They want to have a relationship with brands. They don't want to be segmented. They don't want to be part of a quote unquote segment. They want they're their own person. Who I am goes way beyond being a Latina, right? There's so many different layers and passion points and ways that I behave and engage and get motivated. And brands really have to dig deep to get to a place where consumers are going to want to engage, right? And their expectation is that you're engaging with them 24/7 and everywhere they are. So not just linear, right? But they're everywhere today. Social, digital, you name it, right? Wherever I am, I expect brands to come to me and engage with me, not the other way around. So those expectations are here, and if as a brand you cannot meet them, then you won't be successful.
So it seems hard, right? Like, we talk about not a one segment lens and a one segment view. We talk about the need to understand consumers deeply, whatever they are, 24/7. What's hard? What's challenging about this, either new or already here active space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. The first one is, there's so much data at our fingertips now. Um, we have the power, through one-to-one data, personalized data, AI to really dig. I mean, there's so much information that you can acquire now from your consumer set, right? So you have the data at your fingertips. But the challenge is you also have to truly understand the data, right? And really mine for the right insights, and then make a human connection or a personal connection and tell a human story. You can't just rely on the technology. You have to connect. That's one challenge. I mean, the other challenge is, yes, the data, you have the power of the data today and the power to gather all of this information. But that power is also being protected, right? There's a lot of privacy laws, and so you kind of have to um, inspire your consumers to opt in, almost, right? Because they can opt out, and it's an easy thing. So how do you make them want to opt in to your brand to provide that information so that you can better engage? So that's kind of another deep challenge. But I think at the bottom of it all, it really is about the balance between the data, the technology, and then this deeply human centric storytelling that you have to continue to tell in order to make that connection. So if you know how to balance those three things really well, you often get really magical, creative or magical storytelling that again inspires, delights, the surprises, the kinds of things that your consumers are expecting today of your brands.
And Marissa, that's the payoff, right? And I mean, that's the magic, and it's amazing to see it when it works well. So you talk about personalization, you talk about AI, you also talk about, and you're right, we're not one trade view, one lens view, one demographic, mono demographic. What does what's the role of segmentation then? Like, do you think that companies and brands continue to do segmentations and their personas? Is that the way forward in this sort of intersectional way? Um,
Yeah. I do think companies continue to do segmentation. I don't know if that's the right strategy for today, quite frankly. Um, I don't think that consumers think in segments, or even consider themselves in segments, right? I think the key to success today is, you hear different names. It's personalization at scale. It's truly, it's going beyond the segment. If you lead with the segment, you often, I mean, people shut down, right? Both internally in a company, right? If you're trying to get investment for something and you lead with the segment, sometimes your leadership doesn't pay attention, right? If you go to the consumer base, and you're trying to speak to an audience and you lead with the segment, or you lead with, I don't think you connect as well. To me, it goes way deeper, right? It's really understanding your brand, who you are as a brand, right? What your value offering is, and then how that connects through that customer's journey, right? And it's not one journey, it's like multiple journeys. And, it's the strategy truly is understanding my brand stands for this, and here's where I want to show up and how I want to show up, and, who the most valuable consumers are that I want to be connected with.
So let me ask you this, Marissa. I've been moderating many roundtables in the last year with CMOs and marketing leaders, and what's interesting is we when the topic and theme of cultural relevance comes up, I think always, people raise their hand and go, we must be culturally relevant in today's America. There's like no question. What does that mean for you? What is culturally relevant? We call it at Collage culturally fluent. As you know, what what does that mean, and how do you get there?
Yeah, I what it means to me, I mean, culture is a study of society, right? It is what's happening in the world today in many different ways. What are people talking about? What are people engaged with? And it's deep and broad, right? And being culturally relevant just means, gosh, you're in the conversation. Um, people are talking about you. People are seeing the kinds of things your brand is doing. You're connected at various different levels, at various different verticals, right? That's to me what being culturally relevant is.
Yeah.
How you stay relevant, I mean, it's super difficult to do, right? I think I hear many brands and many CMOs talk about how their brands create culture. We're culture creators, and I really disagree with that. I think, and maybe this is a controversial statement, but I think that's a very arrogant view of the world and your brand. None of us create culture. I mean, to claim that you do is, to me, is insane. We strive to just keep up with it. And to do it, I think you just have to be a student of it. And you have to have a deep humility to be able to truly observe it, and try to inject your brand in it, right? So that you are relevant. And that's one of the things that at the National Football League we try to do. I mean, we believe we're part of American culture, right? In so many different ways. In the most basic of ways, our product, the sport itself, the game, people talk about the game. In the water cooler, they're talking about what happened at the game last night, and who won and who's ahead. And people are playing fantasy and, getting down to the player level and the statistics. I mean, that's culture. People are talking about it, but that's one aspect of it, right? I mean, I can go to the other extreme, and we all know this example because it's come up time and time again in the past year. Taylor Swift all of a sudden shows up at a Kansas City game, starts dating one of the NFL players, and that just becomes a cultural phenomenon. And I remember last year, when the news, it was about a year ago, because I remember where we were. We were going to announce the halftime show, and all of a sudden, there's these news that Taylor's dating Travis. And I remember that the first couple of weeks, the conversation was, what's happening here? And is this something that the NFL is, orchestrating to kind of get young women involved? And I mean, none of us knew that just happened, right? And I was just as surprised to hear the news as anybody on the street, right? We were all surprised. And that to me is the ultimate example of culture happening. Like, those things happen, and you just got to be ready to react, right? And capture the moment and see where it takes you. And try to, capitalize on it, maybe the wrong word, but make sure that your brand is front and center in the moment as it happens, right? And be ready, by the way, for that moment to pass and a new moment to come. So it's to me, it's being able to stay afloat in the current, right? And so many different things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as you're speaking, I think of agility, right? You gotta be agile because things are moving so quickly. Maybe do you have the tools? How are you listening? What? But you're totally right. What a You guys are definitely driving culture. I mean, what an amazing place in American consumers' mind. So, Marissa, we've talked about cultural relevance, and I agree with you. Now, there are many brands that they look at the landscape and they go, "We're after growth consumers." I mean that we need to grow our
Yep.
consumer segment, and we see we're privileged. We work with over 300 brands right now across 12 different categories, and so we see much demand for um, ensuring that they win with Gen Zers, ensuring that they win with Hispanic consumers. So, given your purview, would you say, "Gosh, I don't know what they're doing," or do you understand it, and how do you think of that? Winning with Gen Z generate, winning with Hispanic consumers within the context that you've shared.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about your strategy, and it's all about the data, right? And so I think speaking in generalizations, we want to win with Gen Z or we want to win with Hispanics. I don't know exactly what that means, right? I think you have to dig into the business case and really understand who's driving your business today, who's going to be driving it tomorrow, right? And how do you make sure you retain the people that are your
Yeah,
core business today, and then you're acquiring and continuing to retain who's going to drive your business tomorrow, right? And so that exercise and digging deep is really important. I do think, I mean, at the National Football League, we do have a growth audience strategy. We absolutely have a core strategy. I mean, our core fan base is incredibly important to us. But we recognize that our currency is relevance, right? That is our currency. If we are not relevant 5-10 years from now, when all of those media deals come up, which is the crux of our of our revenue and our existence, really, then we won't command, right, that media value that we have today. You have to stay relevant. And so when we look at the data, we are looking for who's driving conversation, who's driving buzz, right? And how will we engage in the future viewership, attendance to games, engagement with whether it's merchandise, our social media, because that is what drives our currency,
yeah,
right? And so I'm sure brands are doing that. When we look at the numbers, yes, we look at, for example, the growth of Gen Z and Gen A. It is absolutely important, right? And now I'm generalizing, but you start with the general, right? Okay, let's look at the cohort
yeah,
35 and under. Like, we did this exercise 3-4 years ago, and we looked across our spectrum of fans, and we found that the majority of our fans were homogenous from one key area of the country. And the average age was, older. It was 50 plus, right? And so by definition, forget segmentation, forget anything. Like if your average age is 50 plus, you got to do something to start engaging young people,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
again, 10 years, just it's a very simple exercise. And when we started looking at that audience, 35 and under, and you start just looking at behaviors. I mean, you can look at simple demographics first, right? That audience is the most diverse ethnically
yeah. Sure.
that has ever been. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, it's no longer a segment. It's no longer X% is Latino and X% is African American. It's like there's Afro Latino and there's, hey, I'm Asian and Latino and I mean, there's so many different combinations. And by the way, I identify as LGBTQ, or
Correct.
I am a gamer. I love fashion. I mean, there's just so many different aspects. So you got to kind of mind that. And it starts with demographics and then, basic passion points. But then you get into behaviors. And for us, the biggest behavior that really impacted our business was none of these 35 and under, and particularly as you get even younger and younger, individuals are going to spend 3.5 hours watching a live game, right? That's the core of our existence, and our
Sure.
product is live games. So knowing this behavior, it would be very, very arrogant of us as a brand to say, okay, we're going to transform their behavior and make them watch live games in 3.5. Like, no, we have to adapt to their behaviors, their lifestyle. And we have to really think through, how do they consume content? They're not on linear, which is where we are.
Yep.
They're not spending a long time. It's like snackable pieces of content. They care about much more than the game and the strategy. They care about all these other verticals, right? Fashion, music, gaming, you name it, entertainment. How do we start injecting that? They care about the buzz of who's dating who and what the girlfriend's doing, or this player's a young dad and what happens at home. Like, there's so many, when you start really digging into the data and what they care about and their passions, just all these stories start popping up in your mind of what you can tell, how you can engage. And that's where the magic happens, because you mine the data, you start understanding, you start laying out your journeys. All of that is theoretical, and what we as marketers have to do from an insights perspective, that's all great. But the magic happens when you take that and you start creating and you start telling the stories, and you start taking those stories in all the channels where they are, right? So, they're not going to watch TV. Okay, let's go to YouTube. Let's go to TikTok. Let's go to Instagram. Let's be all over social media. Let's start like penetrating their world. And that's when we as a league and as a brand start to see growth, right? Because now this new generation, it's like what we talked about at the beginning. You start penetrating their world. They start talking about you. You become part of the conversation. And that is cultural relevance.
And powerful.
And very, very powerful and very hard to do. Very hard to do. You can't orchestrate it. You have
Yeah.
to.
I mean, so well said, Marissa. And it seems like it must start with insight, right? Like you talk about data that needs to be converted into kernels of insight, and you see, when brands get those insights right, magic happens on the other side. Obviously, there's a lot of work in that in that journey. One I think last question before we go a little more personal, which is um, backlash. So we live in a polarized America,
Mhm.
in every way. There's now political attacks in sort of DI world. There's so much happening. How what do you think about the role of potential backlash? How to best navigate it for you guys, for the brands, etc.
Yeah, I mean, for us, if just take a look at the National Football League, right? We are a microcosm of America. So at any given moment, 50% of our audience feels a certain way and the other 50 feels the other way, right? Because we represent America. And so that's always been kind of a litmus test for us, is to make sure that anything that we convey, that what we message, is unapologetically who we are as a brand. And we as a brand are a unifier. I mean, we unify through sport, we bring people together. It is the joy of competition, right? We're a stage of these epic possibilities that truly uplift, because it's an escape from your life, if you will, and you come together to enjoy this incredible game. And that's our brand. And if you stick to that core, um, do we get backlash for trying to be a unifier and touting our game as, an escape? Sure. But that's who we are, and we're unapologetic about it. And as long as we stick to that, I think we're good. And that's at the highest of levels, right? I think, you alluded to the question of backlash potentially around DEI. And here's what I'll say. Again, we are a macrocosm of America. We represent America. We need to reflect the fan base that we serve. And our fan base is incredibly diverse. And every single fan has to feel included and invited, and part of the game. And that, in my mind, is the ultimate definition of diversity and inclusion, right? So if that gets backlash, I mean, that is who we are as a brand and what our mission is. So I don't know.
I mean, what's interesting is that it starts with values. It starts with mission. In this case, I think it's congruent to business. So actually,
Absolutely.
in many ways,
Absolutely.
it makes it easier. Marissa, we you've been so generous about sharing your wisdom that has been acquired through so many years in such great places. We now want to learn a little bit about you, not just from you. And so, what inspires you? What motivates you?
Yeah, I grew up. I'm from Mexico City. I grew up in South Texas, in the border region, of Texas, and from a very early age, I saw firsthand the plight of immigration, right, which is still such a big topic today. And I'm not going to get political about it, but one of the things I saw is an incredible community of individuals that went unseen, unheard, and often vilified, right? Stories were created about this community that weren't the reality. And that is what has always inspired me, is how can I, you know, shine a light on people that aren't seen or aren't heard, and tell the real stories, because they're so powerful. And I saw it firsthand. So that's always been kind of my true north and inspiration. And it's interesting. I have been in the world of brands for a long time, because that's what marketers do, is tell stories, and connect with people. And in my mind, I have to make sure I connect with those that feel the most unseen and unheard, and make sure that they are seen and heard through the power of storytelling, and often through the power of the brands, right, that I represent. So it's always been kind of a true north for me.
I love that. Even though we're doing very different things, I think we share this in common. That's wonderful. And if you go back in time, if you travel back in time, and would have the opportunity to give your 20-year-old self advice, what would that be?
Gosh, it's such a great question, because I see my 20-year-old self in a very, very different person today. But I would say kind of a tough piece of advice, and a bit of a more inspirational piece of advice. The tough piece of advice is this. If you want to truly get ahead and climb the ladder, if you will, it's not a ladder. There's a lot of different things you do, but if you really want to be successful, I always advise, especially young people, seek out the key stakeholders, the key influencers, the key decision makers in your respective organizations. Seek them out, understand their problems, like what is it that they're trying to accomplish, and make yourself your mission to solve them. become their problem solver. Because that's how you become indispensable. That's how you're seen. And ultimately, they'll pull you up, right? If they see you as a problem solver, as a thinker, as a partner, that is the kind of the first tough advice. Go do that. And then the second piece of advice is it's very easy, especially when you're young and ambitious and you want to get ahead so fast. It's very easy to get distracted and to be pulled by different things that pull at the core of who you are. Don't ever lose who you are, right? People talk about authenticity today. It's kind of a word, it's such a powerful but yet overused word that I don't think people understand the importance of staying true to yourself, to who you are, to your roots, no matter what the temptations are that come at you, no matter what the quote unquote advice from other people, oh, be more this, be more like that. Stay true to who you are. Because ultimately, 20 years later, you look back, if you stuck to who you are, the people around you will be a true reflection of who you are, and you're going to have a powerful network around you that lift you up. So those are kind of the two things, right? Be super laser focused on problem solving and for the decision makers. And then once you're a decision maker, in the process, don't lose yourself.
Marissa, such great wisdom and kernels of gold for the younger generation. Thank you so much for giving me and giving us your time and lessons learned in your great trajectory. So thank you.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.
It's been a fun conversation. And to our listeners, thank you for your time today. If you learned something today or laughed, tell someone about this podcast. Thank you again, Marissa. And this has been another exciting episode of Cultural Fluency Makers, and see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Cultural Fluency Makers. Thank you for joining us. Please share your comments and what you would like to hear more about. Be as specific as possible. For show notes and more, please visit culturalfluencymakers.com. This show is proudly sponsored by Collage Group, unleashing the power of cultural intelligence to fuel brand growth. Please follow Collage Group on LinkedIn, and we will see you next week.